following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, comfortably zoned, talking baseball in the zone with four of the incredible mavens of our time. Hal Bock is here. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be with you guys.
It's good to have you. George Case III.
Yeah, I like to echo the same sentiments. It's always nice to be with all of you.
And I love this. I love saying this tonight. Al Blumkin. You've been on the DL for a while, and we've been sending you good vibes. And
yeah, I had major back surgery, which I didn't think would be major, but it turned out to be major. And back is still very, very,
Yeah. I can well imagine. Good to hear your voice, though, and please join us in welcoming our guest. David Hubler is going to introduce him. Welcome back, David Hubler.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be back. It seems like a reunion.
Yes, all of us together. It's the only podcast done that by phone they can accommodate four geniuses. So
where are they? Where are they?
Yeah, where'd they go? Where'd they? Who are you talking about, Ralph?
I have a good imagination. That's you got to give me that.
Yeah.
All right, David, take it away with the guest and enjoy, ladies and gentlemen. We're privileged.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm an editor at the American Public University System, and one of my colleagues who has written a good number of articles for us is Barry Sholloenberger, who I learned very early on was a AAA ball player in the Cincinnati Reds system, and actually came into the AAA with Pete Rose. So, Barry, I thank you for coming on tonight. It's really a great privilege to talk to you.
Well, great to be here, David. You know, hot stove season is over and spring training's begun, so, you know, we're right where we want to be. Right,
and that's why I was hoping you would be able to join us tonight, because not only is it spring training, but it's also an unusual year in terms of what the minor leagues have become and what they're doing. We wanted to get your take on some of the new regulations that are in the minors this year, and also the contraction of the whole minor league system. We're hoping you would talk to us about that, your feelings about it, and also a bit about your years coaching at Alabama. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, you and I have talked at length about some of the innovative changes that are being considered. I'm not overly enthused about some of them. Some of them I am. I think I think they have to get rid of the shift. I think the shift has messed up the game to some extent, and it's a simple fix. It's kind of like the NBA outlawing the zone defense. You know, just keep the infielders on their side of second base and keep them on the infield dirt, and it's pretty easy fix. Some of the other changes, however, maybe robo-ump to call balls and strikes. You know, you and I have talked about that. That could be a major change. And as you know, baseball's prided itself over the years of being able to compare generations with generations. I'm not so sure with something like that. Some of those old record books may just have to be discarded. I'm not sure. What do you think, David?
That's a good point. And please, guys, join in, because I I do know a couple of the changes that are being made. One, in fact, in the minor, Barry mentioned the shifts. Yeah, they're going to do that in Class AA. They'll have to play 4 infielders on the infield dirt at all times. So, and the idea there is they don't want to probably make it look like a softball game with a 4th outfielder somewhere playing middle outfield. But there are so many. The one change that really struck me as being so remote from real baseball is the one about and this apparently is going to happen at Class AAA, changing the size of the bags from from 15 to 18 inches square.
Hey, David, I'm glad this is George. I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'd be curious to see what Barry has to say. I don't understand what that does. I mean, I've been around the game all my life, and the bags are a certain size. What the heck is the difference? Why are they even considering making the bag bigger? What's that going to do to the game? I don't understand it. Then it shortens the distance between the base paths as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, there are a couple of things here that I'd like to chime in on that. This is Hal. There are a couple of things. The explanation that I read is they want to cut down on collisions, and that's certainly a good thing. You don't want injuries. But the great Red Smith once wrote that the greatest measurement in all of sports is 90 feet between the bases, because it just works perfectly. It's the perfect distance. Now, what would George Case Sr., how many bases would he steal, George, if the base was that much bigger?
I can tell you a lot, Hal. You know, I mean, that's what I'm picking up on this, because that really bothers me. My dad being a base stealer, I mean, I just don't understand. The base is a certain size. Why are you going to increase it? If you want to avoid collisions, hey, collisions are part of baseball. It happens. There's more collisions that I see, you know, at home plate, so they've taken that part of it away from the game. But, you know, going into second base, you have a collision, a guy does a roll block to prevent a double play. That's part of the game. But I just don't like the idea of the enlarging the bases, because I don't understand it. And Barry, maybe you can, give me a good explanation, because I've never seen one or heard one.
We all know over the many years how many bang plays there are at first base. I mean, that's the beauty of the 90 feet. That brings into play the running speed of the runner, the batter runner, and the throwing arms of the infielders. And if you make it shorter, you're going to help the hitters. They're going to leg out more base hits than they used to. And again, I'm not sure exactly what the rationale is. Why are they doing that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, in the article I read, the idea is to promote more base stealing, because the distance now is 6 inches. If they go from 15 to 18, that's a 3-inch change at both bases. So it's a 6-inch change, narrowing the 90 feet. So it's 8 feet and 4 inches. Would that be correct? My math is terrible.
No. Hey, David, you're the math. I don't have it in front of me, but that's another part of it. I mean, what Hal had mentioned,
89 feet 6 inches.
Yeah, I mean, now all of a sudden, you're talking about, instead of 90 feet between bases, now you are reducing that. And if you want to improve the stolen base records, well, then all of a sudden, what happens to the old records?
Exactly.
I mean, it's just like just like home run records. I mean, you're talking about, everybody was saying, oh, yeah, well, what's his name, Henry Aaron, he hit 7, whatever it was, because he played more games. Well, now you're going to say, okay, a guy stole 100 bases. Maybe if the bases were where they were before, he would have only stolen 60 or 70 bases. Now, all of a sudden, he can steal. He's a great base stealer. He can steal 100 bases.
Yeah, yep. They're going to try this with Class AAA. Barry, one of the things I wanted you to tell us about was your AAA experience with the Reds, because I thought that was really interesting.
Well, Actually, it wasn't AAA, David.
Oh, okay.
I was on the Reds' 40-man roster. And back then, as you know, until COVID hit, all the players on the 40-man roster went to spring training with the big club. I was on the 40-man roster. Pete Rose was not on the 40-man roster. He was a AA player that played in Macon, Georgia, in the old Sally League the year before and had a really good year. But the Reds already had a really good second baseman. His name was Don Blasingame. Little left-handed hitter, good table setter for some of those really good hitters that the Reds had back in the early 60s. And he is coming off a really good year. The Reds won the pennant the year before. They lost the World Series to the Yankees, but they were a quality National League team with a quality returning second baseman. Only problem was he had such a good year, he wanted more money than they were offering, Don Blasingame. And back then, you didn't have much choice. Either if they didn't want to pay you, they didn't pay you. And
yeah, you're not going to be on any roster.
Yeah, just take what they give you or don't play at all. And so that's what he did. He held out, and that was a tactic that some players used. He held out thinking they'd give him more money. Well, holding out was fine, but while he wasn't in camp, somebody had to play second base. And they brought this kid up from AA, and, you know, Blasingame's still holding out, and now we're playing inter-squad games, and, you know, Rose is doing his thing. He's running out walks to first base in 4.2 seconds. He's sliding head first with the helmet going one way, and all of a sudden, Blasingame decided to, maybe I better get to camp. Well, he got to camp, and he was quickly traded to the San Francisco Giants.
Right.
And me, who was on the 40-man roster, all of a sudden, I looked around. I thought, they can't keep this guy in the minors. And sure enough, pretty soon he was not on the 40-man. He was on the 25-man roster throughout the whole season, and of course, Rookie of the Year that year, as the history books tell you.
It sort of sounds a
that
little
was
like
my experience with Pete Rose. Not a
little bit like the Lou Gehrig story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So what happened to you? Yeah, exactly.
Did you get a chance to know him at all and recognize the nature of the man? And were you surprised later on?
I was not surprised. Personally, I didn't really get to know him very well. I mean, I was a nobody. I was a minor league guy that was there. My locker was right next to Frank Robinson's, if you can believe that. There's a Hall of Famer. Real quiet.
And Veda Pinson must have been right around the corner.
The hardest throwing pitcher I've ever seen was on that team. His name was Jim Maloney. And they didn't have radar guns back there, but I'm telling you, you didn't need one to know how hard he was throwing.
Yeah, I remember, Barry, I remember watching him throw. He was very fast. And,
unbelievable.
That was the era, as you mentioned, that was the era before radar guns. Guys would just be saying, well, he's a fastball, he's really fast, but they didn't have a way to really measure it the way they do now. Now, when you watch a TV or something of a ball game, they're practically have a radar or electronic stuff on every pitch.
I believe that Maloney threw a couple of no-hitters, didn't he?
Absolutely. And he definitely would have been a Hall of Famer. However, the human arm wasn't meant to pitch a baseball.
Right.
Arm problems, and that was the end of him.
Barry, let me ask you something. What position did you play?
I was a pitcher. And
you were? Okay.
To me, yeah.
Did you have arm problems at all?
Absolutely. One pitch.
Yeah.
One pitch after pitching 226 innings in the minor leagues 1 year. Right at the end of that year, blew my arm out, and it was never the same.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did you feel it? I'm curious. Did you feel it pop when it happened? I mean, a lot of pitchers will say that they feel it when it happens. And was that in your elbow or your shoulder? Where was it?
Shoulder, and they had to help me off the field from the mound.
Yeah, right.
That's how bad it was.
Yeah.
Wow. And
do you still feel pain in that arm? Do you still feel pain in that shoulder?
The crazy thing is that having to start my coaching career a little bit earlier than I had planned because of having to leave baseball, coaching at the high school level for 8 years with no assistant coaches, I didn't have any trouble. I had to throw batting practice every day. And you know what? Over the course of time, it built up. It has never bothered me since. I tried to make a comeback, even to get back into pro ball, but it was too little too late. But the shoulders held up. You know, I'm pushing 80 right now. I'm playing tennis 3-4 times a week. Only thing I can do is serve, which is like the old throwing motion. Shoulder doesn't bother me a bit.
Wow. That's great. So how did you transition then into college coaching?
Well, as I said, I started as a high school coach here in the Tampa area. Great high school baseball in this area. And did okay. Was at a 6A high school, big high school. And one of my former players had gone to junior college and then to Alabama. And I had sent some letters around to coaches in the SEC about getting a graduate assistantship. And just so happened, you talk about a fluke, he was in the coach's office at Alabama, and my letter was on the top of his pile. He probably had 30 high school coaches looking for grad assistants. And my former player said, "Hey, I know him. He's a heck of a coach. You ought to get in touch." One thing led to another.
Wow.
Yeah. The next year I was at Alabama and spent 2 years there, got my doctorate, and got into college coaching, and, you know, spent 20 years coaching in college.
Well, you know what? That's baseball, Barry, and I've told so many people. I mean, with my dad being a former ball player, baseball is really a very small world. And, you know, with something like that you just described, I can understand that happening very easily.
Sure.
One person knows somebody else, and that's what they say, and that's great. And I wanted to ask you one thing about coaching in Alabama. I'm curious. Being a baseball coach, Alabama is such a football school. Were you guys sort of relegated to second-class status being a baseball coach at a football school?
Well, in terms of national recognition, I think I'd have to agree with that. Of course, any sport would take second fiddle to Alabama football.
Right.
But the real thing is, it was a tremendous help. During the fall, I'd get recruits from all over the world to come, that they could come watch an Alabama football game.
Right.
Come on a recruiting visit. So, you know, getting them on campus is the key. If you can get them there, you can sign good players. So that was really a boost to my ability to recruit good players, the football program. And I never made any excuses about it. I told them, you know, you don't know anything about Alabama baseball, but I'd like you to come here and come to one of these football games, and while you're on campus, I'm going to show you what Alabama baseball is all about.
Right.
And I did it. That's what I did.
Well,
would you give us a Bear Bryant story before I forget to ask you?
Yeah. I got a bunch of. He hired me, by the way. He hired me as the Alabama baseball coach in 1979. In about this time of year, in 1979. Now, a little later in the year. He was the AD as well as the football coach, but he didn't do much in the way of administration. He turned that over to his longtime assistant named Charlie Bailey, Sam Bailey. And so that's who I dealt with most of the time. But because my predecessor was also a recruiter for Alabama football, his office was on the football wing of the main building in Coleman Coliseum. So I was I was with those football coaches every day that I coached, which was quite a experience. But one of my favorite Coach Bryant stories, this was toward the end of his career. As you know, he died early in January of 1983. I had already been there a couple of years. But toward the end of his career, some smart aleck young sports writer asked him, said, "Coach, don't you think by now the game of football has kind of passed you by?" And Coach Bryant looked him right in the eye and said, "If you're talking about X's and O's, yeah, maybe you're right. But I still know something about winning."
Oh.
Yeah.
You could have heard a pin drop. What a great comeback that was, huh?
No, that's a great story.
That is a terrific story. And I can just see the look in his eye.
Barry has a good story about Paul Newman there, too, the actor.
That was one of the most unexpected things ever. I mean, who could have ever thought at a pregame batting practice session before a series game with LSU around my batting cage. There was nobody else on the field but our team. It was a Sunday game, and, the visitors got to hit early because the home team wanted to sleep in, and looked up, and there around the batting cage on the field, I saw this little guy and thought, what? And I heard one of the players say, "You ought to get his autograph." He was telling one of his fellow teammates. I said, "Who the heck is that?" And I walked out there, and I'll be darned. And he was a small gentleman, but he had on a pair of shorts, and he had been hitting in the batting cage, from what I understand, batting tunnel, and he was just standing there watching us take batting practice. And I looked across the cage, and it was Cool Hand Luke in the flesh. And I was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't think of anything clever to say. Stupid me. All I had to do was go back to the dugout. I had a bag full of game balls. I could have got a couple game balls, maybe signed one and said, "Mr. Newman, here, I'd like you to have this autographed baseball. Oh, by the way, would you mind signing this one for me?" But I didn't do it. I just stood there with my mouth hanging open. He didn't hang around long, and I found out later he was in Baton Rouge making a movie called Blaze, and his producer was a big baseball fan, and of course Newman was a sports car driver.
Right.
He competed. I mean, he competed in Le Mans and some of the real open wheel sports car races. But anyway, they got to arguing one night about which was more dangerous, driving a sports car at 150 miles an hour in a road race, or standing up the home plate with a pitcher throwing 90 miles an hour. And so they were going to prove a point, and they came out to the field that morning, and he actually took batting practice in the tunnel, and then he came out on the field to see, what that must be like. But, in batting practice, my assistant coaches weren't throwing very hard, so I'm sure he wasn't impressed with the velocity. But I wish he'd have hung around for the game, which he didn't, because both the pitchers in that game ran it up there pretty good in the low 90s. But anyway, that was the Paul Newman story.
That's great.
Never talked to him, but couldn't believe there he was. Cool Hand Luke.
Would you tell us about some of the players that you developed and that you're proud of?
Oh, wow. I think I had about a dozen or so that made it to the big leagues. Several dozen that signed pro contracts. Probably the most famous is Dave Magdalen. Playing pro ball. Dave's
Hitting machine. I'm a Met fan.
New York Mets. Yeah.
Yes.
Still the hitting coach for the Colorado Rockies. He was the Golden Spikes Award winner his junior year, and of course, first-round draft pick, and signed after that year. But he holds the record for Division I college hitters. His junior year, he hit 5:35.
Channel.
What's that? There's some
Channel 12.
cross noise on there.
Finding Your Roots is on Channel 12.
Who's? You hear that?
I hear
Ralph?
that. I don't know where it's coming from. Let's try to work through it. I have a question.
Okay.
Of all the people that you developed, who came the furthest from when you got him to when he left? And if you can't think of anybody, maybe you could just say Dave Magdalen again, because I like hearing that name.
I wrote an article, David, one time not too long ago, and you wanted me to name names in that article because I talked about a young man who had gone through 6 major league drafts and never got drafted. Never. In 6 drafts. Back then, they had for junior college players, they had a January draft and a June draft. So he went through 4 of those in junior college, and then out of high school, and then after his junior year at Alabama, never got drafted. But after his senior year, the White Sox drafted him, I think, in the 52nd round, got into the minor leagues, and against all odds, made it to the major leagues and played, I think, 6 or 8 seasons in the big leagues. But there's a guy who went through, he was seen. He played in the SEC for 2 years for me. So he was seen by plenty of scouts and yet not drafted after all that time. But anyway.
Is that Dave Magdalen you're talking about?
No, this guy's name is Frank Menachino. And I couldn't make it up. All you got to do is look in the atlas. You'll see him in there. But he sure enough made
Barry, I got a question for you. My dad coached baseball at Rutgers for 10 years, and I played for him. I'm very familiar with college baseball, but I'm just curious. Did you get a lot of junior college players, or did you get quite a few, or was it a good mix of guys for 4 years? The way it's going now, a lot of guys are playing like 2 years junior college, and then they go into Division I college baseball. So you've got them for like 2 years. I'm just curious as to what the mix was for you as far as your roster was concerned.
Yeah, that varied from year to year. A lot of it had to do with how many juniors you had on this present team that went pro, because you weren't sure. You couldn't really use their scholarship because they might not sign pro and come back. And you couldn't very well say, well, hey, I gave your scholarship to somebody else. So when I'd lose a lot of juniors through the pro draft, then I was more in line with picking up some junior college guys that could come in and play right away. Other than that, if I wasn't losing a lot of guys, and by the way, you know what the record was one year? One year I lost 11 players the draft.
Wow.
6 of my juniors and 5 signees. 5 kids that I signed, they signed pro. 11, and the pros aren't taking your backup guys. They're taking the very best players you got. So you can imagine what kind of year I had that year. I wasn't the coach that year because we stunk.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing number, Barry. But did your players did they get a full ride or partial scholarship? I don't know how many scholarships baseball gives compared to football.
No. Title IX took care of that. Baseball, and still to this day, gets 11.7. Don't ask me where that came from. 11.7 scholarships, and you can split them up among 25 players.
Right.
Oh, wow.
So you give partial. Dave Magdalen, first-round draft pick, 3-year starter. He didn't get a full ride. You couldn't give anybody a full ride.
Right.
No. You couldn't get enough players doing that. I don't care how good they are.
And I guess the football team took the major share of all of it.
They get full. When a kid signs a Division I football scholarship, it's a full ride. It's tuition and fees, room, board, and books, and living expenses.
Wow.
But it's not like that with the so-called Olympic sports. They lump baseball in with track and field, tennis, golf, cross country.
The so-called non-revenue sports, right?
Exactly. You have to remember you don't have 65,000 people watching a baseball game, but they are coming out to the football game. So that's a revenue sport. That's why.
Hey, Barry, I have a question. In 1962-63, when or 62, right, it's 1962, when I was a sports editor at the NYU paper, I was out in Detroit for a college newspaper conference, and I met a lot of guys from the SEC, student, not athletes, but student journalists. And when I came back, I put together an article because this is what my impression was among the guys. And I remember speaking to guys from Auburn and places like that. And they were all, because don't forget, this is before the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act we're talking about. So their assessment was that it's coming, and integration is coming to these schools. And most of these schools that I somehow were paired with was from the South, from the SEC and places like that. I'm just wondering, you were there sort of on the cusp of moving toward integration. Alabama was obviously a segregated school at the time. How did you handle that at the time, even if it was just before integration? What was your take on that?
You know, I went my first year as a graduate assistant was the fall of 1973. That was right about the time that Alabama football was getting integrated. And I knew John Mitchell very well. John Mitchell's the first black football player to play in a game. So I was kind of at Alabama when, integration first started in coming into play. And I'll never forget one of the early, really great black football players at Alabama was Sylvester Croom, who went on he was the first black head coach in the SEC over at Mississippi State. But I'll never forget a sports writer asking him if he thought Coach Bryant was a bigot. And he said, man, you couldn't be more wrong. Coach Bryant treated everybody the same, like crap. He said, no, he wasn't bigot. He treated every player the same, like crap.
That was like Lombardi, right? He would call all the players dogs,
Hey, Alan, what would you like to ask our guest? Just want to hear your voice.
Okay. Do you always have the metal bats? I mean, because, how does a player who's used to hitting with a metal bat adjust to a wooden bat?
They came about right about the time I went to Alabama in the early 70s. Up until then, it was all wood, both in high school, college, and the pros. But there's no doubt that the metal bat is a different world from hitting with a wood bat. But, I don't ever – I think players make the adjustment. I think maybe too much is made out of the fact it's more of a cost item, how much they cost and how long those aluminum bats last. I don't think it makes that much difference, especially now. They've toned down the aluminum bats where the ball speed, the exit speed is really not that much different from wooden bats. But sure, I went right through that era. I never hit with an aluminum bat when I played. It was always wood, even in high school and college and pros.
Okay. Did you ever coach in the Cape Cod League or any of those wooden bat summer leagues, sir?
I actually played 2 years in the Basin League, which is out in South Dakota. It was after my freshman and then my sophomore year of college. I went to a small college in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, called Moravian College, and the Red Sox sent me out to the Basin League after my freshman year, and I got to play with, major college guys, and that was quite an eye-opening experience. My style of pitching didn't make it in that league. I had to make an adjustment and learn how to pitch. Couldn't get by on stuff against those guys. They were good hitters. And each team was allowed to have 2 ex-professionals on their team. And man, did we really pitched around them. We didn't give those guys much to hit. They were a different breed than those college guys. But that's where I learned how to pitch, in the Basin League in South Dakota. And, of course, it was all wooden bats back then.
Barry, let me ask you this. I'm from Pennsylvania. You mentioned Moravian. I'm very familiar with Moravian. Where did you grow up? You were a Pennsylvania guy, I think, right?
Yeah, born and raised in Reading.
In Reading? Okay. Because
yeah.
I live about an hour from Reading, so, I'm very familiar with that area. But I'm just curious because a lot of people, let's say Bethlehem, Lehigh, they consider Lehigh because of the program, but sure. Moravian is a wonderful, smaller school, terrific. And I'm just curious because I knew some people who went to Moravian.
Yeah. They call those little schools in Pennsylvania Muhlenberg and Gettysburg, and
right.
call them the poor man's Ivy League schools.
Right.
Yeah, Barry, did you get drafted? Were you drafted?
There was no draft when I was in college and when I signed. The draft didn't come into play until 1965. That was the very first
Rick Monday. I think Rick Monday was the first drafted player.
You know who the Reds' first draft pick? The Reds sent their first 2 draft picks to Tampa, where I was in my last year of pro ball. They kept paying me, so I said, "What the heck? I'll go ahead down there and Tampa and put a uniform on." But I couldn't pitch. My arm was shot. But they sent their first 2 draft picks. First one was Bernie Carbo. Remember that name?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
left fielder. Yeah, heck of a player.
He made fame with the Boston Red Sox.
You might remember Johnny Bench. He was number 2 pick that year. That was a pretty good draft for the Reds. Just those 2 right there.
Yeah.
Not bad.
I played both of those my last year.
Well, how did you wind up in the Reds organization? If you weren't drafted, how did you get there?
No, I signed out of Moravian with the Red Sox, Boston Red Sox.
Okay.
The Phillies tried to sign me as an outfielder, and I turned them down and signed with the Red Sox as a pitcher. And they sent me to Waterloo, Iowa, my first year in pro ball, and just had a ridiculously good year. It was right at the end of that year I blew my arm out, but I did so well that back then they had what's called a rookie draft. I don't think they have it anymore. But after your first year in pro ball, the big league club had to put you on a roster. Major league, AAA, AA, single A, whatever. And any other team could draft you as long as they put you on one step higher roster. So the Red Sox, knowing my arm was shaky because they knew I was hurt, I don't think the Reds did because they drafted me and put me on the Red Sox had protected me on the AAA roster, which back then was Seattle. But the Reds drafted me on the big league roster. That's how I got to go to spring training with the big league team.
Yeah. Hey, I want to go around the horn because time is of the essence. Start with Alan Blumkin. One more question for the coach.
Okay, on all these nonsensical rule changes that Manfred seems to be making, what's your opinion of the runner on second base in extra innings and the 7-inning doubleheader games?
Don't get me started there. That is the worst rule change. just to limit the amount of extra inning games. Are you kidding me? Those are hallmark games in baseball. Some of those long doesn't necessarily have to be 20 innings, but 10, 11, 12. I mean, don't do that. Start the runner on second base. Come on, give me a break.
They always say there's no clock in baseball.
What would Harvey Haddock say?
Yeah, right.
If you think about it, a perfect game for 12 innings.
Yeah.
David Hubler.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Because this is what interested me in your career, coming into the university as you did. How did you transition to the academic world?
Well, I think my players kind of, honestly, from when I got my doctorate in 1975 until I got out of coaching 20 years later, my doctor's degree did absolutely no good. It wasn't like I had some kind of magical inspiration when to take a pitcher out of the game or pinch hit for a hitter or when to bunt or hit and run or steal. So it was kind of nice to have it, but it's really nice now getting to use it. Teaching it at AMU and getting to do some of the things I'm doing. It's a long time coming because I really spent 20 years and didn't really have a use for the doctorate, but I think my players kind of respected that. So when I talk to them about, academics first and all that, I think they listened a little bit, maybe more so than some other coaches.
Yeah, don't you wish we had a virtual baseball team?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. I could ask you a million other questions, but you must have some final questions too.
How about Hal Bock? Take it away.
Barry, you're an old pitcher, and I don't know if you saw this the other day. The Mets were playing the Cardinals in an exhibition game, and the Mets have a utility infielder, spare infielder named Luis Guillaume. He went up to the plate, and the first two pitches, 100 miles an hour, called strike, swinging strike, 0-2. He's in an 0-2 hole. 22 pitch at bat, and he got a walk. And I'm wondering what you think of a 22 pitch at bat.
Wow.
He fouled off 16 pitches.
Somewhere along in there, when it got to be about 8 or 9 or 10, I think I'd have plunked him.
Well, that's what I'm wondering about.
Great.
Yeah, that would end that problem.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys, this is one terrific podcast. Thank you, David Hubler, for bringing the guests. Thank you.
Yeah, Barry, great. It's terrific having you.
It was. George Case III was with us. Hal Bock was with us. David, this was I was just going tremendous. I wanted to thank you and can't find the words. Nice also to have Al Blumkin back with us. Stay getting better. How about that?
Okay, guys.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening, everybody. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all. Happy trails.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Nice to talk to you, Barry. Thank you.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.